Cancian, who is a senior research associate in the Quranic Studies Unit at the Institute of Ismaili Studies here in London, where I'm based currently. He completed his PhD at the University of Siena in anthropology, concentrating on the cultural anthropology of Muslim societies and the anthropology of religion. Currently, by the way, his dissertation was on the theological colleges or Hawzat Ilmiya in Syria, which is where I spent also some time in 2007-8. So it'll be interesting for me to talk to him about it also thereafter. In any case, he's currently also a review editor of the Journal of Islamic Studies. Today he's joined us to talk to us about something which I have no knowledge about, so I'm very intrigued, having read the title and the abstract which was circulated. Shi'i Sufism, an early modern mystical Shi'i commentary and its place in the intellectual history of Shi'ism. So, on that note, I'm going to mute myself and switch off my camera so as not to distract anyone, and hand over to Dr. Cancian for his intriguing presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, for inviting me. Just one technical question before I begin. I think I've been given credentials as administrator, so I keep seeing people asking me to join, and it's a bit distracting. If you can, I don't know.
Sure. I use that handle that if you can just change that.
It's not a big deal, but yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for to everyone who joined this presentation. I'm going to warn anyone who might have followed my work over the last few years. We might have met at conferences, seminars, and so what I'm going to talk about is nothing new, as it is parts and bits of my ongoing research on the Tafsir Bayan al-Sa'ada, which is, well, let's take it from afar. My research on early modern Shi'i Sufi Quranic exegesis. So it's mainly based on a couple of chapters of my forthcoming monograph on this specific piece of Quranic commentary, the Tafsir Bayan al-Sa'ada, written by a Sufi Shi'i master, Shi'i Sufi master. We're gonna look at that, at matters of definitions in the beginning, because I think it's key to understand the whole picture and to understand what is my main argument. So in a way, the conclusion of my one of the conclusions of my research. So let me begin with saying that there are, I think, huge gaps in the academic study of Shi'i Sufism, or Sufi Shi'ism, or Sufism within Shi'ism, and vice versa. So as you can see, the complexity of the matter is reflected in the terminological instability that I've created by not being able myself, having worked for now a decade on this matter, to establish a definition for this phenomenon that I am studying. And this is for due to several reasons that some of which I'm going to present and offer to you. Give me 1 second. I just switch the pages. Okay. So there is this terminological instability. While relations, interactions, and commonalities between Shi'ism and Sufism have been widely explored and addressed by academia in general, it seems that little or no scholarly attempt has been made so far to assess if, when, how, and to what extent a fully-fledged Twelver Shi'ism, Twelver Shi'i Sufism came into actual existence, and how it negotiated its legitimacy and identity vis-à-vis both exoteric Shi'ism, which to some extent, well, at least to some, may sound an oxymoron, exoteric Shi'ism, and we will see why to me it is to some extent an oxymoron, and non-Sufi Shi'i esotericism, because of course there is an esotericism, a mysticism, which is non-Sufi within Shi'ism, which has, you know, very ancient roots. So in this seminar I will attempt to address specifically this issue through looking at this late 19th century tafsir. It is obviously a work in progress, mainly based on the research that I've told you I've carried out in preparation of my forthcoming monograph, which inshallah is going to be to come out in the Quranic Studies series at Oxford University, with Oxford University Press in 2021, next year. It was due to be published this year, but the pandemic has slowed down things a great deal. But anyway, it's a work in progress, so I look forward to ideas, suggestions, feedback, and inspiration from the colleagues and audience who are here today. As I've mentioned, I'll be looking here at the Tafsir Bayan al-Sa'ada fi Maqamat al-Ibada, which is this is the full title. I'm going to call it Bayan al-Sa'ada, or Tafsir Bayan al-Sa'ada, for the rest of the presentation. It is a tafsir written by a 19th century Iranian Sufi master, Sultan Ali Shah Gonobadi, who passed away in 1909. Who was the eponymous master of the so-called Gonobadi branch of the Ni'matullahi order. At the time where this tafsir was written, the genre of tafsir and tafsir writing had seen more than half a century of sort of decline, a lack of originality, and also a lack of really authoritative works. So the Bayan, along with a couple of other works, coeval, broke into the landscape as a bold statement by the master of the biggest Sufi order in Iran at the time, claiming full legitimacy for Sufism within the religious history of Twelver Shi'ism. So now I'm going to explain why I consider this tafsir so important within the Ni'matullahi order and without the Ni'matullahi order. So different to the rest of the literary output of the master, it was written in Arabic rather than in Persian, and addressed mainly the wider community of the ʻulamā beyond the community of the Sufi, of the Darawish, of the initiated. So it simultaneously talks to a wider audience, but at the same time to a very specialized audience. It's not really for the lay people. So the Bayan, in terms of intellectual history, represent a synthesis of classical Sufism, Sadrian Neoplatonicism, and Usuli Twelver Shi'ism, and it is in this synthesis that this work is so original and so new in a way. And it was built on the bedrock of a specific historical narrative with which Sultan Ali Shah tries to reconcile the parallel lineages of the ʻulamā and the Sufis, seen as two independent and equally legitimate chains of transmission of authority, of course. So the main theme I'll be trying to cover here, at least partially, you know, as far as time and space allows, is the following. What is Sultan Ali Shah's understanding of religious and spiritual authority, and what is the role of his commentary, the Tafsir Bayan al-Sa'ada, in the intellectual and religious history of Twelver Shi'ism? So, my hypothesis is that it is with this work only that we can really start to talk about Shi'i Sufism in the proper sense. I know it's a bold statement, it's open to criticism, it is problematic, I can see myself the problem in this, but it's, to my understanding, not to my knowledge, but to my understanding, it is the first time that we have an organized Sufi order which comes to maturation, which comes to its peak, which is simultaneously, entirely, and explicitly Twelver Shi'i, Usuli Twelver Shi'i, and at the same time organized with a master, a structure, a hierarchy, and at the same time reclaiming the tradition of classical Sufism. You can call it Sunni Sufism, but it doesn't really make sense to the understanding, to the idea of the history of Shi'ism that these people have, that these masters have. It doesn't really make sense to them from that point of view. But let's start from a definition. I'm going to quote from a work, and then I'll ask you a question. So the definition is, quote, Shi'ism and Sufism are two names for the same truth. Okay, you can have your word. I'm inviting you to write what you think, where you think this definition comes from. I'm waiting for some inputs so that I can go on.
Well, on that point, we know there were certainly those scholars who identified as Shia who also prided themselves on identifying as Sufi at the same time, like Sayyid Haydar Amuli and his like. And we have in the Shi'i tradition numerous ahadith which come about, which give a very esoteric flavor to it anyway. So the two are somewhat inseparable, I would, in terms of my understanding.
It's the same truth, one reality, one same truth, and two different names. I mean, it sounds really Sayyid Haydar Amuli, right? And it could have been uttered by him, but it's not. This is a quotation from a little booklet entitled Oshnoi bo Erfon va Tasawwuf. So acquaintance, getting to know Irfan and Sufism, written by the late master published in 2004, and written by the late master of the Gonabadi, Nimatullah Gonabadi order in Iran. The master passed away in December last year, 2019. Yes. So, and it is quite a statement. I mean, it's not new. I mean, it's been proposed. It's been put forward by with kind of the same wording with Haydar Amuli and other exponents of the mystical mystical side of Twelver Shi'ism. But so if we look at this definition, at this modern definition, Shi'i Sufis give of Shi'ism and Sufism, and this master specifically, we obtain a result that is at the same time comforting and puzzling, to me at least. It is comforting because it relieves us from the pains of historical problematization. After all, if, as Henri Corbin famously argued, if Shi'ism is essentially esoteric, and is Sufism as it has often been said, is the esoteric or mystical dimension of Islam, then the difference between the two is a merely fictitious one based on a linguistic discrepancy. A more detailed discussion of this will call into question the issue of what is esotericism, which is not really the place to go through. So let's not get trapped into the chain of refining definitions. What is esotericism is though important for the understanding of this stance. For the sake of clarity and for lack of better definition, we will call esotericism in any religion, not only in Islam and not only in Shiism, that specific set of doctrines, disciplines and practices that call for a closer relationship between man and the spiritual realm through direct and intuitive knowledge of the truth, obtained through particular spiritual practices reserved for the initiated disciples of a spiritual guide. So you have these fixed elements, a personal relationship with the invisible, with truth, with God, whatever you may call it in different religions, specific practices, both specific practices and doctrines, and the initiation by a master, a spiritual guide. Obviously, if you look at Shi'ism in general, not at mystical Shi'ism or Shi'i Sufism, just take Shi'ism, Twelver Shi'ism. Well, look, take Shi'ism in general, not even just Twelver. The matter is further complicated. As can we really talk about an entirely non-esoteric Shi'ism? My answer would be no, because even the most exoteric-minded of the ʻulamā in Shiism have to do with whether they want it or not, have to do with the imams. Of course, you cannot make away with the imams in Shiism, and if you go to the imams and to the saints of the imams, you can be exoteric minded as you want, but you will have to do with esotericism in a way. So the current master, well, the late master of the Gonabadi order, the Nur Ali Tabandeh, explains this definition, the definition that I've mentioned, in detail in the same book. In it, the master explains that the historical differences between Shi'ism and Sufism are just a matter of a style of expression, but they essentially point to one and the same reality. We may take this definition as a useful tool for research into the history and doctrines of the order, but we must not take it as face value, because it comes from the inside. And the historical complexity of the matter would be obscured. And here comes the puzzling, well, that was the comforting part. Here comes the puzzling part. A believer can actually take the following essentialist stance. If the essence of Shi'ism corresponds to the inner knowledge of God, the vision of God through the eye of the heart, these are all the all words that have been used by the mystics. So if the essence of Shi'ism corresponds to this, then Sufism and Shi'ism overlap to the point of being, in essence, indistinguishable. Yet historically, there have been also there have been also Sufis opposed to Shi'ism. We know that. Shi'is who have considered Sufism as a major heresy. So this is a whole big part of the intellectual history of Shi'ism. To the point that we had ʻulamā in the 18th, 19th century, one in particular who was called the Sufi killer, Sufi Kosh. And also Sunni Sufis, sharing so many central teachings with Shiism, have been suspected of crypto-Shiism. And also we know that Shi'is with deep esoterical leanings and others, we have, we also had Shi'is with deep esoteric leanings and others totally adverse to any hint of esotericism. Then there have also been Imami scholars and traditionists whose position on Sufism is unknown to us. We don't know what they were thinking about Sufism. Therefore, to make sense of this amount of information, contradictory only if one sticks to the essentialist narrative, one should look at the history of the individual cases. So we have to look at the thinkers, we have to look at the authors, we have to look at the ʻulamā individually, situating them in the wider framework of the history of Shiism. But let's begin from what we know. So there are some basic facts of the relationship, regarding to the relationship between Sufism and Shiism throughout history that can be said to be established knowledge. And I will provide you with some points. Each one of the following points, though, have problems of their own, which would need a proper and nuanced investigation, but this is obviously not the place to go into detail on that. Let's take these points as a stable enough starting point to reflect on what I want to reflect with you today. So, we know that the teachings of the Shi'i Imams provided Sufism with most of its esoterical doctrines. We know that Sufi personalities who did not profess Shi'ism stricto sensu were either followers of one of the Imams or held them in high esteem and veneration. There are very famous cases: Hassan al-Basri, Uwais al-Qarani, Bayazid al-Bistami, Ma'ruf al-Karhi, and so on and so forth. There's a number of them. We know that the Shi'i Imams are credited with having uttered words of condemnation about Sufism. So some of the Imams condemned, apparently, so we have it in the Hadith, they condemned Sufism, and we will see, if we have time later, how the Gonabadis and the Nimatullahs in general reply to that and make sense of that. We also know that after the greater occultation of the 12th Imam in 329/941, the relationship between Shi'ism and Sufism kept proceeding separately, but sometimes along blurred lines. We also know, and I'm going on with the points, that after the Mongol invasion, Sufism and Shi'ism merged again in more than one instance, in particular in the way the Ismaili tradition of Persia permeated Sufism. Then we also know that in the 15th century and 16th in the 15th and 16th centuries, the diffusion of Ibn Arabi's ideas in Shi'i circles increased dramatically. This is the time of the great synthesis. And we have names here as well, theologians and theosophists, as Coben would call them, Abi Jumhur al-Ahsai, and so on and so forth, Ibn Fahd al-Hilli. We have many names if we look at the sources. Then we also know that Shi'ism became the religion of Iran through a dynasty whose leaders were originally Sufi masters, the Safavids. Of course, a very peculiar kind of Sufism, but they were Sufis, in a way. It is still the time of the great synthesis. So the boundaries between denominations and schools are somehow blurred. You know, at least more blurred than we may think. And then to finish with the established sort of knowledge, as far as Iran is concerned, we know that Sufi orders became quasi-irrelevant in the 17th and through the 18th centuries. Although at the same time, Sufi ideas flourished under the name of Irfan. This is a completely another story. If you want to go into detail about that, refer to Ata Anzali's monograph on Safavid mysticism. So Sufi orders, so organized Sufism became quasi-irrelevant until the Ni'matullahi revival in the late 18th century. When masters coming from India, because the Ni'matullahiyya became India-centered and then came back to Iran in the late 18th century and caused this revamping of Sufism. This also is a very complicated matter. There are issues with the sources. There is a narrative which is posthumous it is a sorry, I had a phone call. Sorry, I should mute the phone. But let's go back to the and so how long do I have now?
Well, it's 3:30 now. We can go on still for 10-15 minutes if you need that much time, and inshallah after that we can move to the question and answer session.
How long? Sorry, 10 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Oh, well, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, 10 to 15 minutes. That's right. So let's go to the tafsir, to the Bayan as-Sa'ada. It is only recently that this tafsir has started to be given the attention it deserves. The stigma of being a work written by a Sufi master, by a Sufi, so the master of the most influential mystical order in Iran and Twelver Shi'i scholar of unquestionable pedigree, so he was a mujtahid as well. But there was this stigma, and this stigma carried its weight in the ostracism of the work from the annals of the history of tafsir writing in Shi'ism until very recently. And this was reflected in academic scholarship as well. Until the late 20th century, outside of Ni'matullahi circles, there has been only scattered oral evidence of the diffusion of the tafsir. The closed world of religious seminaries, the Hausa, didn't allow students and scholars to freely and openly associate themselves and their studies with Sufism in general, and with such a contested and controversial personality to them, of course, in particular. Although today we are not witnessing a true rehabilitation, the mention of the commentary and of its author is no longer the unbreakable taboo that it used to be. Although a certain degree of discreetness remains, we can say that besides the extraordinary impact that it had on Ni'matullahi Sufism, the Bayan as-Sa'ada is today a tafsir very well known to anyone dealing with exegesis in 19th and 20th century Iran, but its fame is very far from being universal and widespread outside the specialist circles like that, for example, the Mizan, the Nemuneh, and the ongoing commentary by Ayatollah Jaburi. So it's a tafsir which is well known, but it's still not very much openly mentioned and referred to. Well, let me just skip the part of. So before this tafsir, another coeval tafsir, important tafsir, appeared in the landscape of Twelver Shi'ism, early modern Twelver Shi'ism. There had been a pattern of decline at the end of the Safavid time, and revival at the end of the 19th century. The reasons of which have to be investigated. I had prepared a part on that, but we don't have time to go through. But anyway, so it appeared at the moment where tafsir starts to be important again. Not that it wasn't important, but if you look at the collections of repertories of sources, there is a decline of tafsir writing, in the sense, yeah, you have pieces of tafsir, works that are not really original, a lot of marginalia, hawashi, and so on and so forth, but you don't really have huge important pieces of tafsir. This is why I'm somehow yesterday at the Institute of Ismaili Studies we had a presentation entitled The Revival of Shi'i Tafsir, spanning from Haidar Amuli to the 20th century. I don't think we can talk about a revival in that in such a wide time frame. There have been different patterns of decline and resurgence to me. But anyway, I'm not bothering you with the names of the important and less important works written before that. And let me go straight to the point. So there is this revival in tafsir writing at the turn of the century, of which the Tafsir Bayan Sa'ada is one of the protagonists. Let me also skip the part. There was a huge section of my talk which is about the relationship between Ni'matullahi Sufis and Usuli Shi'ism, which is a controversial one. Let's say that they take a compromising stance.
Dr. Cancian, we very much invite controversy here, so you can feel free to go into that if you want.
No, it's not because it's controversial. It's because there's no time to go into detail. But anyway, I'm gonna talk about that right now. So to understand this relationship and the position that Sultan Ali Shah had on the Akhbari Usuli dispute, we have to look at what his concept of Shi'ism is. To question what Shi'ism was to Sultan Ali Shah is to penetrate his spiritual and intellectual world. In keeping with Shi'i hierohistory is a term coined by Harry Corbin, so sacred history. Sultan Ali Shah understands history as the place where the initiatic message of the truth is passed down from prophet to prophet and from imam to imam since the time of Adam. This message of divine guidance will flow uninterrupted till the end of the world, and I'm kind of paraphrasing his words, in its dual dimension of warning of the pitfalls of worldly pleasure and bringing the glad tidings of spiritual beatitude, respectively corresponding to prophecy and imamate. The message of the prophets is universal and does not discriminate the elite from the masses, the khas from the am, and it is aimed at everybody indiscriminately, because it is concerned with leading all within the boundaries of the Sharia. In a sense, it has only a preparatory function, as it is the walaya that is able to discriminate the qualified from the unqualified. It is only to the qualified that the invitation, the da'wah of the imam is directed. Walaya is nobler than nubuwah, and the prophetic message is instrumental for the perfection of religion, which is only achieved through the initiation to the knowledge of the imams. Of course, that isn't to say that the Nabi is less noble than the imams. On the contrary, the Nabi owns the walaya as well. So it has a highest degree of nobility in a way. But it is the walaya that gives that nobility to the Nabi. So religion then is essentially esoteric. Its exoteric aspect, the Sharia, being only there to ensure the orderly conduct of people's life and to protect their life and property. So Muhammad is therefore the place of manifestation of the universal walaya, mazhar walaya kulliya, mazhar velayat kulliya. Whereas Ali is the place of the full manifestation of the truth and of the absolute walaya. In his capacity of possessor of the secrets of the invisible word, Ali's selected companions were called his partisans, Shia, and followed him in both the esoteric and the exoteric, as opposed to those who, during his caliphate, only followed him in his exoteric capacity. Accordingly, there were also, these people, the Shia, were also called refuser, the Rafidi, as they refused, quote, refused this word and their followers. They were also called Gnostic, Orafa, in that they were aware of the divine secrets reflected in the mirror of the Walaya. And also Sufis, because of their habit of wearing unpretentious and coarse wooden robes. So Sufism is nothing less than Shi'ism. This again is the position that we keep finding, and the other way around. And Sufism, being nothing less than the essence of Shi'ism itself, has been around since the beginning of Islam. So when the 12th Imam disappeared from the eyes of the believer, goes on Sultan Ali Shah, the walaya, and I'm quoting, was covered with the veil of occultation, and the Islamic community had split into different sects and schools. So it was time for the appointed sheikhs of the Imam al-Askari to function as the guides of the Shi'i elite. He's talking about the deputy of the 4 deputies of the 12th Imam. With the protraction of the occultation and the passing away of that generation of guides, the other appointed sheikhs, these are the words of Sultan Ali Shah, became unknown to the Shia. It is at this point that most of the Shia, bewildered by the apparent absence of a connection with the living Imam, believed that the world was without a living connection with the Imam, and turned to the book and the tradition themselves without a human guidance. Twelver Shi'ism at that point bifurcated. This is his Sultan Ali Shah's understanding of the history of Shi'ism. Twelver Shi'ism at that point bifurcated. On one hand were those who taught that no act of devotion is accepted by God in the absence of the formal imitation of an authorized alim. And on the other camp there were the others, the rest. This passage is key to the clarification of Sultan Ali Shah's approach to the question of the akhbari usuli dispute. In it, the master seems to keep his discussion of the matter consciously, somehow ambiguous in a way, and that's the compromising stance. And this is where he declares his allegiance to usulism. So the authorized alim, Sultan Ali Shah says, who must be versed in the juridical sciences and able to interpret the book and the tradition, derives his authority from the chain of transmission and authorization that connects him to one of the impeccable imams. This uninterrupted connection existing among the fuqaha as well amongst the mystics is valid until today. So we have 2 chains of transmission, and those who are within it are called Sufis, Gnostics, and ascetics, salikun. On the other hand, there are those who claim that following the book and the tradition without the mediation of the alim of the time, ዑለማ, is enough. As an effect of the enmity of the latter towards the former, accusation of impiety, heresy, and unbelief were fabricated and took ground within the mass of the Shia. And here, the dispute between the Akhbaris and the Usulis came forth according to Sultan Ali Shah, to the point that even great personalities who in fact had regular authorization were vilified, like for example ʿulamā Majlisi. The aim of Sultan Ali Shah in positioning himself and the Ni'matullahi order within the rank and file of Twelver Shi'i orthodoxy, for which his tafsir is a fundamental text, is therefore corroborated by his insights on the fundamental identity between Sufism and Twelver Shi'ism. This identity for Sultan Ali Shah is not just essentialist and ideal, it is historical, as we have seen. So I have, can I conclude?
Yes, go ahead, it's fine.
So this identity of Sufism and Shi'ism at the level of the essence allows Sultan Ali Shah to restrict the words of blame uttered by the great Twelver Shi'i scholars with regard to Sufism to Sunni Sufism only. So the words of condemnation that are present that are uttered by great Twelver Shi'i scholars are considered to be aimed at Sunni Sufism only. So that Sufism which neglects the walaya of the Imams. That Sultan Ali Shah's definition of Sunni Sufism excludes much of historical Sufism, as demonstrated by, among other things, the master's recognition of his own silsila, is of little significance here. Sultan Ali Shah subscribes to Twelver Shi'i. Then I get to this point again. Sultan Ali Shah subscribes to Twelver Shi'i pre-18th century anti-Sufism by restricting it to an activity of denouncing deviant, non-Shi'i or only nominally Shi'i mysticism. Those deviant Sufis are all deserving curse and blame. مستحق العن ومذمت. The spiritual genealogy that Sultan Ali Shah then produces includes such great names of Twelver Shi'ism, regardless of their being Usuli or Akhbaris, such as Ibn Tawus, Nasiruddin Tusi, Ibn Maythan Bahrani, Sayyid Haidar Amuli, Shahid Al-Thani, and so on and so forth. The names are, there's a long list of people who are considered part of, are considered our own. In keeping with the long tradition of Shi'i gnosis, albeit with some variation due to his unique position as a master of a declaredly Shi'i Sufi order, for Sultan Ali Shah, Shi'ism and Sufism in their true sense coincide, and the traditional divide between Akhbaris and Usulis wanes, loses importance. I had a second conclusion, but it's a very long one, and it would require a long argument. So I leave it there. I think it's there's enough material to carry out the Q&A. So my talk has come to an end. Thank you very much for attending and for the patience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cancian. Thank you so much for, as far as I was concerned, an extremely informative presentation about which I had very little background knowledge. And on that note, before I invite questions from the attendees, I can already see one hand up. So just the rules, as we have every session. If you could use the facility here to raise your hand so that I know you have a question. When you are invited to do so, please unmute your mic and ask the question. Let's keep the questions as concise as we can. And Dr. Cancian will, inshallah, respond to them. So one hand I can already see up is Fatima Aga. I will ask her to ask her question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. My question is that can we find any connection of the practice of the murshid and the murid, one thing, and the other, the passing down of the Sufi leadership, which is passed down from one one authority to the next, is there a connection of that with the Shi'i, thing with the lineage of the Imams being passed down? Is there a connection? Thank you.
Yeah, there is a connection. It's a very interesting point, and this would require and would call for a whole session in itself. I'm not sure in which work, and I'm not even sure whether or not it's in Sultan Ali Shah, but it's one of the 19th century works of the Gonabodi order. There is this way of solving the issue of there is a doctrinal way of solving the issue of the existence of the lineage of 12 imams, the 12th of which is still alive and is in occultation, so he's potentially this is also controversial, but he's there. I mean, he's there to come back. And the existence of a lineage of Aqtab, of Qutb, of Poles, which is a high title. It's not even just the Sheikh. Is a Qutb. The Qutb is one of the definitions, one of the terms that are used to refer to the Imam, and that's why Sufis have been accused often by anti-Sufi Shi'is to be usurpers of the authority of the Imam. So the problem is solved by this creative, in a way, use of the idea that the transmission of walaya can be duplicated. So you have a solar walaya, which is the walaya of the Imam, the line of the Imam, the lineage of the Imams, and a lunar walaya. So the Qutb, the Sufi Qutb, is to the to Islam as with connection with the the Sufi Qutb is to the Imam like the moon is to the sun. In a way, is a reflection, is a shade. So the light of the Qutb comes from the light of the Imam, who is, by the way, who is hidden. So you can only have his light through the Qutb. So this is how the apparent dichotomy is solved. Does that respond to your question?
Thank you. Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cancian. And I know Imran has his hand up also, but before I ask him to ask a question, I just want to come in there and use my prerogative and privilege, because the query I had was kind of linked to what was just asked. The criticisms from Orthodox or mainstream Shi'is, I mean, of course, the esoteric aspect of mainstream Shi'ism cannot be denied, as you've already mentioned, as an essential aspect of Shi'ism.
Say it again. Sorry, I had a problem hearing you.
The esoteric aspects of Shi'ism cannot be denied, even by any Shia, one who identifies with it. But the criticisms that come about Sufi practices and the orders is when you mention the authority given to the mashayikh or the mustafid, if you like, or the murshid, and whether or not that they hold the same authority as the 12 imams who are considered to be infallible. In many or in some Sufi writings, as you will know better than myself, refer to or advise the murid or the follower to be like a dead body in the hands of the one who washes the body, so as if it's suspending all intellectual thought and will of their own, especially when you said the mainstream or the Shia Sufis would hold the Sharia as sacrosanct. Now, when those teachings, some can seem to contravene the Sharia, and then, I mean, I think that's where a lot of the criticism stems from Orthodox Shi'i views.
Yeah, this is one of the points of criticism that have been, in a way, instrumentally raised. Because, I mean, if you look at the text, this accusation is always addressed, and you know, it responded in a very simple way. So that, for example, that utterance that you have to be with the sheikh as a dead body with the washer, or whatever the wording is, the answer is that this is only referred to the practice of the spiritual practice, the practices of the dhikr, for example. So the dhikr is given upon initiation, and in that you have to follow the instructions of the master as if you were a dead body. But it's not. It's nothing to do with social life, nothing to do with Sharia, nothing to do with any of that. And it's not just a rhetorical device. I mean, if you see the practice, I mean, I'm talking about what I know more. So in the Gonabodi, if you look at Sultan Ali Shah, he was leaving his disciples having taking their own decisions in matter of political or social life. And he was viewed, for example, it was the time he was killed at the time of the constitutional revolution, and by some he was seen as a defender of the monarchy, anti-constitutionalist. But he had actually, and his correspondence testifies of that, he had disciples who were involved in the constitutional movement, and he was leaving the disciples having their own, making their own choices, and in terms of social, political, that side of their existence, that the criticism doesn't really make sense.
Thank you.
As long as this specific order is concerned, of course. Also Sufism is a label for a very articulated and a very diverse phenomenon across history and in time and place.
Thank you. I can see Imran has his hand up, so if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. So I had a couple of questions. I'm going to try and order them sort of so that they track, but please feel free to answer what you'd like. I was curious as to what were the imperatives. It's related to something that you said earlier on, i.e. you had a kind of formulated and reified Sufi order that was avowedly Shi'i, and I seem to think that it resembles almost the structures of the turuq that you could get with the Sunnis. And do you know what the imperatives were within the Ni'matullahiyya to actually create a lineage that basically looks like a standard Sufi order? And do you know anything about the Tawbiyah in terms of the Qunabadi order as related to the last question in terms of the inheriting of wilaya, the transmission of wilaya, of light from student to master? And then I had a question on two further questions. One was, to what extent do you think the advent of modernity and sort of the decline of empires had anything to do with the resurgence of, say, folk religion or tasawwuf in a way that would speak to the needs of people, where, say, the legislative religion of the Qajar period no longer sufficed? And finally, what do you think, I'm sorry for going on, what was the purpose then of the uninitiated Shia, the people who subscribe just to the zahir of the religion, those who didn't inherit the wilaya, say, of the Imam or the Qutb of the age in Sultan Ali Shah's theology? Thank you.
Well, it's a very interesting set of questions. Let me start from the second one, which is very interesting. What the relationship, or if there's a causal relationship or somehow a correlation between the coming to the fore of modernity and Western ideas in the Muslim world and in Iran in particular, and the resurgence of you said folk religion.
Well, I couldn't think of quite the term, but as in a religion that was popularized. It's probably not the right term.
Yeah, I wouldn't classify at all Ni'matullah Sufism as folk religion. I mean, it's actually a very, I would put it in the box of the highly intellectual and intellectualized religion. So there's a very sophisticated doctrine behind it. But anyway, so if we can restrict your question to the possible relationship between modernity and the resurgence of mysticism, if you want. And I think the identification between mysticism and folk religion is somehow misguided and somehow the result of a misunderstanding. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting question. The revival of Sufism in Iran, and it would be interesting to see what happens in other areas, but seems to follow a different pattern, because it happens at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, and this is when Western ideas haven't quite come to at least in a critical mass way, haven't quite come to Iran. And it is true on the other side that when the tafsir is published, it's the end of the 19th century. We are in the full swing of modernist, even religious reformism, modernist thought. But the tafsir, and this is also a matter of an article that I published on the journal, in the Journal of Persianate Studies. The tafsir is not in communication, doesn't talk to that line of the intellectual history that is happening at the same time and simultaneously, but he's not speaking to them. He's not. If you read the tafsir and if you focus on the language, on the structure, it doesn't look at all a late 19th century work. It could be a 16th or 17th. I mean, you know that it's not, because there are references to authors and ideas that are that come before the early 19th century, but so this tafsir is not in conversation with what's going on in terms of reception of Western ideas, and there are two really separate rooms in a way. So your third question was about. I forgot completely the first one. I have some recollection of the third one. May you give me?
Oh, the final question was in the writings of this master. What was the purpose then of the Shia? What was the place of the Shia who only subscribe to the exoteric religion if they are uninitiated? Are they, say, unsaved, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have. Yeah, I don't have a structured and definitive answer on that. But it seems that there are Shias who are open to the Walaya and they're waiting to be reconnected to the Walaya at some point, somehow, through some sort of initiation. Of course, they're not. They have That's a very, very interesting question. I'll need to reflect more on that, because it's really interesting from a theological point of view. Sorry if I don't have an answer.
On that note, we have typed questions in the chat. I don't know if these participants are able to use their mic and ask the question. That would be preferable. If they don't, I can address the question to you and read it out. The question is here: is Twelver Shi'ism dependent upon the framework of Irfan/Sufism in order to understand the sayings of the Imams which have a mystical aspect? Because otherwise these esoteric sayings or teachings can be labeled as ghulu.
There's a lot of definition issues here. So what is ghulu? Before you brand something as ghulu, you have to establish an orthodoxy, and it's not quite. This is very difficult to me, at least. I don't like this this idea of a fixed orthodoxy. Well, yes. You know, the short question, you know, could be yes. In order to really make sense of some sayings of the Imams that are highly charged with esoteric meanings, yeah, what you need is a connection with the walaya. I mean, yeah, Sufism or a connection with the walaya in order for you, and with the master, who is the authorized interpreter of the words of the Imam through the authority that he gains from the Imam. Yes, it does make sense.
We do have to wrap up. It's past 4 o'clock, I know, and we've taken lots of your valuable time, Dr. Cancian. But there is one more. I'm not sure if you can see the typed or the chat area of this meeting. There's one more typed question which is not directly relevant to your presentation, but on the chat section of this meeting, if you have access to it, there's a question saying about Ibn Arabi, and
Ibn Arabi saw some funny and misguided things in his kashf, whereas someone like Sheikh Al-Ahsa'i had a vision of the Imam in his kashf of the Visio Day.
I think that's more a response to the initial question, which is higher up thing about Ibn Arabi and the knowledge of the prophets.
Yeah. Ibn Arabi saw some funny and misguided. I don't know what things they are referring to. So, like Sheikh Al-Ahsa'i had a vision of the Imam in his kashf. So, is the implication of this that Sheikh Al-Ahsa'i's visions were real and true and guided, and Ibn Arabi's were not? I don't know. I mean, we cannot say. We can only, as scholars. I mean, I'm talking as a scholar here. As a scholar, we can only see what they said, they have seen, and work phenomenologically, and work, you know, and work on that as a matter of study. So Ibn Arabi, so that I don't know. I mean, it's not up to me to say who were misguided and who were not. I mean, I don't know. So it's the only thing that we can say about that is that well, it's interesting stuff to work on and to reflect on anyway as scholars. As Henri Corbin would have put it, if we work from a phenomenological point of view, we have to take those data as data, you know, as facts, whether they're true or not. The vision are there, or they are said, you know, the vision are said to be there. So it's interesting stuff anyway. So I don't know if this was the, if I answered you. Oh, that's a okay. Second, in regards to Ibn Arabi, how much of his influence and guidance led to the success of the Ottoman Empire creation? I have no idea. I don't know. To be honest, I think that the Ottoman Empire would have been there even without Ibn Arabi, to be honest. But we can, I don't know. I mean, of course, there's a huge influence in the Ottoman mystics and Sufis and intellectuals of Ibn Arabi. It's huge. But whether or not he was functional to the success of the Ottoman Empire, I don't know. I don't think so.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cancian. On that note, as we approach sunset and we've taken your time, which we are extremely thankful for, I certainly learnt a lot from the presentation and also from the question and answer session at the end of it. I learned even more. So once again, I thank you profusely for your time and thank everyone for attending and contributing. And on that note, our next research seminar will take place in December, which I'm sure you will all receive the information about through various media and email and WhatsApp feed and all of that. It will be with our own faculty member, Dr. Ali Fanai. So we hope to welcome you to that as well. Thank you once again, Dr.
Thank you very
Alessandro
much.
Cancian.
Thank you. Thank to the audience, and well, thank you again. It was a pleasure.